Well, since November 5th, we are in a radically different world. So we've had to adjust somewhat some of what we've presented, but we recognize that the disinfo problem has gotten geometrically worse, with the federal government not only deleting important climate information from public view, but also the federal government itself being a spreader of the same disinfo we so desperately need to stop. So after the presentations, I'll open up for questions and to hear ideas from you for actionable steps for the coming year to counter disinformation. So uh, let me start by switching slides. So the first slide is a title slide to this section, which is the climate crisis and disinformation and the facts. So science denial is not about facts. It's about identity and bias. As Jonathan Swift put it, you cannot reason somebody out of something they didn't reason themselves into in the first place. People don't reject science because they lack information. They do it because it reinforces their existing beliefs. It's often about solidifying one's identities or biases. Now, misinformation spreads much faster than the truth. Lies are 70% more likely to be retweeted and can reach 10 to 100 times as many as people. Now, many science deniers are not independent thinkers, but rather individuals influenced or radicalized to serve someone else's agenda. Most science deniers are pawns for the benefit of someone else's agenda. So science denial isn't just a mistake, it's a strategy. It thrives on partial truths, motivated reasoning, and confirmation bias. Now, here's the dangerous part. Even when we try to correct misinformation, we can unintentionally reinforce it due to the illusory truth effect. The more a lie is repeated, the more people start to believe it, even if it's being disputed. So combating science denial isn't just about presenting facts. It's about understanding the psychological forces behind it and finding better ways to engage. So scientists overwhelmingly believe that climate change is due to human activity, mainly the burning of fossil fuels. And you have complete agreement across the board from almost every scientific organization. But what has happened is science denial, this seeding of doubt by corporations or by political bad faith actors, still have gotten us to the point where 36% of the population still think that scientists don't know the causes of climate change. So I know that's a huge frustration for all of us. So the fossil fuel industry has spent decades sowing doubt about climate science. And in 2024, they're doubling down. Now, the American Petroleum Institute, or API, has launched an 8-figure disinformation campaign designed to mislead the public and policymakers about the dangers of fossil fuels. And at the same time, Exxon's CEO openly dismisses net zero goals as too expensive, prioritizing short-term profits over long-term planetary survival. So this isn't new. If you look at the years going back, it follows the same playbook used by big tobacco: deny, delay, and distract. The goal isn't to prove fossil fuels are harmless, but to create just enough confusion and skepticism to stall climate action. The science is clear. Fossil fuels are the primary driver of global warming. The real cost isn't in transitioning to clean energy, it's in continuing to burn oil and gas while the planet suffers the consequences. So here's what I was referring to earlier And now this was just uh, last year, the ExxonMobil CEO has moved to a different way to deny our efforts to combat climate change. And they say that people who are generating the emissions need to be aware and they need to pay the price. So think about that statement. Here's an fossil fuel CEO who is creating the gasoline that is being burned in cars. They're marketing to people to continue buying these fossil fuel cars and to burn their product. And then they turn around and say, "Whoa, in terms of the impacts of this, that's the consumer's fault." So this is a new dangerous movement towards still blaming the consumer. And we'll talk about it um, more. In essence, what the fossil fuel companies are doing is we'll take the profits and you pay for the costs of mitigating the horrible consequences of fossil fuels. So this slide highlights the massive economic impact of climate change versus the cost of mitigating it. The key question is, how would you like your salary to be cut by 20% and even more if there is no mitigation and attempt to limit greenhouse gases? And that's what exactly at stake on a global scale. Now, the chart compares two scenarios, one where we take strong climate action, and that's the RCP 2.6 line, and one where we continue on a high emission path, that's the RCP 8.5 line. Now, the 2.6 and 8.5 numbers don't refer to temperature differences because they're just from some scientific versions of studies. So I'll just say right now that the RCP 2.6 is expected to limit warming to about 3.5 degrees centigrade, about 2 degrees centigrade, 3.5 degrees Fahrenheit, rather, above pre-industrial levels by 2100. The other line, the 8.5 line, that's high emissions, business as usual scenario where fossil fuel use continues to rise, and it is projected to lead to, now get this, 9 degree Fahrenheit increase in world temperatures of warming by 2100, which obviously would lead to catastrophic consequences. Probably the loss of most of the major species, animal species in the world, and tremendous costs for all of us. Trillions of dollars lost every year, projected at $38 trillion annually. So on the other hand, the cost of mitigation, transitioning to clean energy and reducing emissions is far lower, about 6 times less at 6 trillion. So that's the other line. So this isn't just about avoiding disaster. It's about making an economically sound choice. The cost of inaction is far greater than the cost of acting now. In short, that orange line, that's 9 degrees Fahrenheit increase by 2100, doesn't have a mitigation line because it assumes no mitigation occurs. It's the worst case scenario where we do nothing to curb emissions. Now, according to the International Monetary Fund, fossil fuel subsidies are divided into direct subsidies and indirect subsidies. So direct subsidies, these are government financial supports that directly lower the price of fossil fuels for consumers or producers. They increase tax breaks and incentives, special tax benefits for fossil fuel companies, such as deductions for drilling costs or exploration, production subsidies, government payments, or financial support for fossil fuel extraction, and consumer subsidies, government policies that artificially lower fuel prices for consumers, often seen in countries that cap gasoline or electricity prices. This is for the entire world, this graph. Now, the indirect subsidies, these subsidies account for the hidden costs of fossil fuel use that are not reflected in fuel prices, essentially costs that society absorbs rather than fossil fuel companies. They include the unpriced environmental damage, including from extreme weather, rising sea levels, agricultural losses, health impacts, medical costs, and reduced productivity from air pollution related diseases like asthma, lung cancer, and heart disease, and of course, traffic congestion and accidents. And the social costs of vehicle emissions and road congestion, which are often worsened by cheap fuel. So it's the costs that are being hit are tremendous. And this is another slide of, for the fossil fuels, which fossil fuels are getting the most indirect benefits, usually tax benefits or incentives from the government. And you'll notice that natural gas is leading the way because the fuel industry, in my opinion, has fooled politicians that natural gas somehow is is a better fossil fuel than all the others, which is patently not true for two reasons. One is the the carbon dioxide that natural gas releases is the same carbon dioxide that's released from other fossil fuels, but the production and transmission of natural gas leads to the um, emission of methane gas. Methane gas, when it gets into the upper atmosphere, is 88 times more heat warming than carbon dioxide. So it's a horrible um, uh, fossil fuel. Now, of course, coal is still, even though it's hardly getting any subsidies right now, you can barely see the blue line. Coal is still the worst because of all the various other health impacts for coal, like because of the high particulate matter, causes asthma, sulfur dioxide. It's a horrible fuel. So the what would happen if all fossil fuel subsidies were removed? Well, the International Monetary Fund took an estimate of that across the world. And what they discovered is that 1.6 million lives per year would be saved. Government revenues would rise by about $4.4 trillion worldwide, which is 3.6% of global GDP. Emissions would fall 34% below 2019 levels by 2030, and incomes would be redistributed because the subsidies are going into the pockets of the fossil fuel executives. Now, now you're starting to understand why the petroleum industry, why the fossil fuel industry wants to keep this good thing going. In January of this year, they launched, or actually, it was January of last year, they launched an 8-figure media campaign designed to convince the public that a transition away from fossil fuels will jeopardize our way of life. Now, after COP28 in Dubai, the final document said we need to transition away from fossil fuels. That was the um, convention that was held, I believe, just a few months ago. Fossil fuel companies gave the impression that they finally signed up to that, but just 1 month later, the American Petroleum Institute began this massive campaign to convince Americans that it's impossible to transition away from fossil fuels. So this is when my colleague Tom always says they are just plain liars. So the expert Ben Franta from Stanford Law School says this is really deceptive, but incredibly successful to put the blame on people to ensure that nothing changes. We need to change the laws. We need to stop the subsidies for fossil fuels. We need to stop the policies that give them an incentive to continue. So I have up here the share of electricity generation by source across all US states. And I like to compare my state, Illinois, to Oregon. And Oregon is one of the better states when it comes to the percentage of power for electricity generation that is sourced from renewables. It's 62%, which is incredible because in my state, we're less than 25% renewable. So I really have to hand it to Oregon, as I'm aware that more than 40% of this is from your hydroelectric. Unfortunately, in Illinois, much of our half of our electricity generation is from nuclear, and which we're keeping open, and we don't have much in terms of um, uh, renewable. We don't have that much wind, and we're way behind in solar. Uh, but one of the things we like to point out is this is not just blue states and red states. It's real interesting to look up here, and you'll see some red states that are getting a high proportion of their electricity generation from renewables. So, for example, look at South Dakota, Kristi Noem's state. Uh, they're getting 79%. Well, that's primarily from wind, but it may be from solar as well. So here's a state that's probably doing a fantastic job of exporting all of its fracking and sending it to refineries down south. But their own electricity is being generated mainly by renewables. And I believe Texas is also a very positive state, although I can't read it right now. And where are we with electric vehicles? Well, the US is not doing well. We're the blue bar. So despite, or that's for North America, really. So it also includes Canada. And we're falling way, way behind China, which is leading in retail sales for electric vehicles. Then you have Europe, and Japan's an interesting case. Japan's one of those cases where the manufacturers there, Toyota and Nissan and others, were the leading edge of hybrid cars, and it's very common that the leader in the previous technology is very slow to advance the next technology. So I'm hoping that Japan will catch up soon. Now, in 2024, the market share of battery electric vehicles, excluding plug-in hybrids, varied significantly. But in the United States, battery electric vehicles accounted for approximately 9% of passenger car and light-duty trucks. Electric vehicles represent about 24% of new vehicle sales in all of China. In Europe, it was about 16%. But it's still increasing. It's just that we need to get that to increase even more to get rid of the fossil fuel cars. So emissions, because of these trends, emissions aren't really changing that much. Actually, they're going up 1.5% a year. And if we're going to make the Paris Accord, the net zero goals, we need to get them down 7.5% a year. So we're going the wrong direction. And what's happening is that the flood events, the 1 in 100 year storms, hurricanes, are all increasing massively every year. And we are on a path that is often too great to even consider what the damages can be. And we don't even know about half of what's going on. Today, it's just become a normal thing in the Chicago area. We had tornadoes come through the southern part of the city. And this is Chicago that years ago, no tornado would ever get close to Chicago. They were always in the southern part of the state. And Florida now gets tornadoes constantly when that state never used to get tornadoes. And this is Acapulco. And you can see here that this was in 2023. I didn't see anything on the newspapers about this, and these buildings had total devastation. 104 people died, and as I said, it didn't even get any news coverage, and it's $12 billion worth of damages. Um, so here you see where the U.S. and where the existing um, emissions are coming from if you look all the way to the right. And yes, right now, China is the number one emitter. And so many people or some people say, well, why should the USA do anything with China being so bad? But if you look over time at a cumulative map over who has put the most greenhouse gases or carbon dioxide into the upper atmosphere, we are still number one if you count from the Industrial Revolution back in the 1850s or 1860s when just got started. A real interesting line there is the United Kingdom. They were the number one emitter of carbon dioxide in the 19th century, and then the United States took over after in the 20th century, and now China is on a breathtaking increase. But this just shows you that um, the problem and that the problem is that carbon dioxide, once it's in the upper atmosphere, it's got a lifespan of 1,000 years before it drops out. So when the world back of 100 years ago, even about 60 years ago, um, the earth has natural emissions of carbon dioxide, and it pumps CO2 into the atmosphere, and that's necessary to keep the earth warm. If there was no CO2 in the atmosphere, we'd be a very cold planet. But our forests and our um, uh, wetlands and our soils do a good job of taking some aspects out there so that if you have this bathtub, it was things were kept so that the CO2 can remain at the proper levels. But along comes human emissions, and as humans add to the CO2 atmosphere, the removal of is not going to work. And so we're in danger of overflowing CO2 in the atmosphere where it'll just become too hot. So here you have how much land use um, is helping, and every year the forests and nature take out about 7.6 gigatons of greenhouse gases, or largely carbon dioxide, out of the atmosphere. So it counteracts our emissions. And so in the United States, we issue our it's a big number, even though that orange number is doesn't look big. 3.5 gigatons a year is our net emissions into the upper atmosphere. The problem is that we're growing the red bar. That was the 1.5 to 2% increase that we're doing every year. And then uh, we're deteriorating our forests and our wetlands and soils to be unable to be as an effective a sink. So this whole equation is getting worse instead of better. And if you look at the in parts per million in the atmosphere, we were at when the Industrial Revolution started, the Earth had 280 carbon dioxide molecules, parts per million, and now we're at 427. So we've never been this high. Um, and this gives you the sources of how we get there, and then the carbon sinks. So how it comes down. And it's it's something we've got to stop. But as long as it's going to increase, it's going to create uh, major increases in temperatures. And this is just the actual graph of the average temperature of Earth um, over time. And as important, it's causing the oceans to warm too much. And from knowledge of my sister's experience in Portland, I know that the warmth of the Pacific Ocean is really affecting Portland's weather, creating much hotter um, uh, summers for Portland and forcing more energy use as well. So this graph illustrates the trajectory of greenhouse gas from 1970 to projected levels in 2050. And the red line represents historical and projected emissions, while carbon removal projects are in green, and blue shows the potential impact of climate action. So a return to 1970 levels. So if you look where 1970 is, and to bring it to about there, would still lead to 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit of warming over current temperatures. Now, if emissions remain high, we risk exceeding 5.5%, 5.5 degrees Fahrenheit of warming with really severe climate consequences. So we really need to uh, find a way to reduce our carbon emissions and also come up with ways for increased carbon removal to meet climate goals. So what we can do, this is the part of the section that I usually do. Um, what we were facing before November 5th included lots of disinfo coming from corporations, which obviously will continue. A good example is the American auto industry, which, in my opinion, has mismanaged the introduction of EVs as a reaction to Tesla. So, for example, by the time I got my Mustang Mach-E, Ford had designed a car that was to beat Tesla as a luxury car, but Tesla had already penetrated the luxury market fully. And so it was more logical. It would have been better for American car manufacturers to have lower cost EVs to be rolled out. So by the time the American manufacturers like Chevy and Ford were ready to sell, Tesla lowered the prices and took away other market segments. And the many models by Chevy, Ford, and others were not positioned correctly for the mainstream market. So, what did the American manufacturers do? They blame the consumer instead of their own development plans. But as you can see, they are radically changing their offers to be more affordable as they continue to blame the consumer for lower demand. One of the worst examples was GM, where GM had actually a very popular EV that was reasonably priced called the Bolt. And Mary Barra, the CEO of GM, just killed the car, just said, we don't need it. And she got so much reaction against her that they vowed to bring the boat back. Of course, the boat won't come back for another couple of years. But this is just indicative of corporate America finding ways to blame us instead of their own plans. So, of course, well before this year, we've had the fossil fuel industry definitely implement a massive strategy to keep us relaxed about the climate. Now, this article in The Guardian from last April, I think, very well captures the messaging strategies of the fossil fuel industry. So I'll go through each of these uh, topics. Under energy security, the fossil fuel industry loves to trumpet its role in keeping the world safe, even when it is engaging in pursuing more drilling and more fossil fuel burning, which makes us less secure. The fact is, the US military lists climate change and continuing to burn fossil fuel as a major threat to world peace, at least the US military of the last administration. Now, the economy versus the environment. I've already talked about this. They hammered this theme repeatedly for decades that taking care of the environment is bad for the economy, saying that it would just be way too expensive to act on the climate, and that in any case, climate change was not going to be a big deal. So the best thing would be to do nothing. Uh, Next item is we make your life work. The fossil fuel industry loves to argue that it makes the world work, from keeping the lights on to keeping us riveted by smartphones and TV and clothed in the latest fast fashion. So they create a product, create demand for the product, and then shift the blame to consumers, not just for buying it, but for its associated impacts. This one you've all seen. We're part of the solution. A lot of advertising I am seeing is that the oil companies are actively working on solutions when in reality they are spending just a pittance on real solutions and continuing to drill and expand their fossil fuel capacities. I mean, I see it with BP oil. They changed their logo and colors to green, but they barely spend any money on renewable energy. We also see it in the industry's embrace of the term low carbon to describe not only fossil fuel enabling solutions like carbon capture, which, by the way, is used most likely to be used for more oil drilling. They capture the carbon and then they use it for fracking, again, for more oil. But also natural gas, which industry lobbyists have successfully sold to politicians as a climate solution, which is ridiculous. And then the last thing is the world's greatest neighbor, just in case people still aren't accepting of dirty air, dirty water, and climate change. The fossil fuel industry funds museums, sports, aquariums, and schools, serving the dual purpose of cleaning up its image. However, we in Chicago, our Chicago chapter led an effort to get the city of Chicago to file lawsuits against all the oil companies, and that lawsuit was filed about 6 months ago. So we are actively in the fight to hold these companies accountable. So now we have the huge challenge of weathering disinfo coming from inside our federal government. I only have one slide here, but it's breathtaking as to the amount of disinfo that will be emanating from our tax dollars, from pulling all of the scientific information off of websites, as well as info that will help consumers lower their utility and fuel bills, to brazen lies directed by the president, to political rivals, to key officials from the fossil fuel industry within this administration. It's really hard to keep up. Just remember, I always remember that one of the goals here of the administration is to become like another petrostate. So we're all seeing disinfo increase this year as fossil fuel interests ramp up their disinfo on social media, and mainstream media repeat the views that the climate solutions like autos and solar panels are not ready for prime time. But it's important that in our activities, we not further the disinfo. And these recommendations I got from the European Union, which I think are very good. So the first thing is when you see disinfo on social media, it's really important that you don't engage with the disinfo posts, as this will only amplify the message and give it more attention. The more discussion there is on a bad actor's post, um, the more comments it gets, the more it's fueled to everybody's social media account. Secondly, help to spread correct information through your own channels, networks, online and offline. And of course, be aware of your own biases and get your information from diverse sources for a balanced perspective. Now, I wanted to define something for everybody, and that is the difference between disinformation and misinformation. Disinformation is more like a lie. It's false and it's intended to mislead, and it's usually done by bad actors who have an agenda. Misinformation is false or inaccurate info, which is frequently people who don't understand what's going on, and they pick up on some elements of disinfo and whatever, and they're just really trying to figure it out, and they might include it in their social posts. So it's really important to understand whether you're dealing with disinfo, an intentional lie, or misinfo. Now, a basic tactic for combating disinformation is contained in a handbook from George Mason University in 2020. The idea is that if you respond to social media posts, especially by these disinfo agents, and you argue with them, you are really playing in their ballpark. And instead, the way the algorithms work, you end up amplifying their disinfo. Instead, we as climate reality members have to take charge of the social media and lead with facts and be prepared to pre-bunk or inoculate the marketplace of false ideas or conspiracy theories. And the best way to fight myths is to present the information before the myth spreads. So disinformation is false info intending to mislead. Once you understand who it's coming from, you will be better able to combat it. So I hope we have touched on some of the opposition's tactics here and given you clues on how to recognize the motivations of the players. And again, I like the word pre-bunk, or some people use the word inoculate. So don't amplify the disinfo's reach by purely debunking them or responding directly on their posts unless you know they sincerely want honest information. So, for example, if I know the person and they just picked up some bad information, fine, go ahead and reply, but don't go onto these social media posts where you don't know who the author is and try to get into an argument with them. It's just never going to work. So this is a good summary of why conspiracy theories seem to spread so easily in today's world. And it's from the Conspiracy Theory Handbook. Part of understanding how disinfo spreads, it's also good to understand why these conspiracy theories of climate denial often spread. Conspiracy theories seem to comfort people who feel powerless or don't want to face what is happening to the planet. So it just becomes convenient. So they either have a feeling of powerlessness, people who feel powerless or vulnerable are more likely to endorse and spread conspiracy theories. They help to explain unlikely events. People tend to propose conspiracy explanations for events that are highly unlikely. They allow people to cope with threatening events, and they're used to dispute mainstream political interpretations. Although this slide was prepared 4 years ago, and we don't know what mainstream political interpretations are anymore in this new world. So, as part of recognizing conspiracy theories, it's again important to recognize what kind of post you're looking at. To me, it's very similar to analyzing a phishing email that may come into your email box. Look at the poster story, and again, don't automatically reply. Just recognize it or help others recognize if it's a bogus poster story based on the person who or the title of the person who posted it, and make sure it's from a credible source before you even engage with it. So if we're going to address how to attack the emission problem, we need to understand the big picture, and this gives us the picture. So this is a pie chart of where emissions are coming from in the US. The largest area is transportation, and these are largely emissions produced by each of us as individuals driving our passenger cars and light-duty trucks. Now, close to 60% of that transportation sector pie slice, pie slice is from our personal cars and our personal light-duty trucks. Now, if you look at the electricity pie slice, the green, 70% of that electricity pie slice is also due to us as individuals. It's consumed by households. And then finally, in the red slice, the residential and commercial buildings, more than half of emissions directly come from buildings. It's in Chicago, it's mostly natural gas furnaces to heat our homes. So if you base, look at all the household usage of those three slices, transportation, residences, and electrical power, you come up with 42% of all greenhouse gases in America can be eliminated if we just make the right choices as individuals. So here's a statement from Rewiring America, a great organization, as to why it's important to electrify all of our machines. So I'm just going to read it. Around 42% of the United States carbon emissions come from our homes and our vehicles we drive. Simply switching everything in our lives to be powered by electricity from renewable energy will go a long way towards getting our emissions down and reducing the impact of climate change. Rewiring America estimates that to achieve zero emissions, we need to install 1 billion new machines or 50 million machines a year for the next 20 to 25 years. So as we discuss what we need to change in our houses, be aware that I'm not telling anyone to go out and buy new appliances now. Instead, we should all be aware of the fossil fuel machines, cars, gas furnaces, stoves, hot water heater, gas range, and stovetop that are operating now in your household. It's important that once these appliances or cars reach the end of their useful life, whether that's in a couple of years or let's say 10 to 12 years, because you just recently bought a new gas furnace, for example, it's critical that you be ready to replace that machine with a machine that does not burn fossil fuel and continue to contribute to the climate crisis. Because when you replace your car or your gas furnace with another gasoline-powered car or newer gas furnace, you are committing to and really taking the opposite of an electrification pledge, because you are pledging another 8 to 12 years of burning fossil fuels as long as that apparatus is operating. And that is a huge problem for the planet. And it also commits you, in a lot of cases, to continue to pay higher utility costs or expensive gasoline to power your car for another substantial period of time. So we at the Chicago Climate Reality Project have developed an electrification pledge. And we did it because during this period when our government and politicians are not talking about solutions to the climate crisis, we at the Chicago chapter are doubling down on the pledge that we have prepared to have the general public commit to replacing all their fossil fuel machines with electric machines. Now, we also have a special pledge for people in climate reality or other environmental groups. And in this meeting, since we're talking to another climate reality chapter, we need everybody in climate reality to pressure organizations to step up and meet today's climate challenge. So these activities remain very important to us. So we need to continue to push through this period of disinfo and skepticism about climate solutions. And we need more people to write more, talk more, be more visible, get on radio stations and in newspapers to extend their message. So here you see on our website, this is the front page of our website of Chicago, and we have Electrify Everything. And then as you get into it, we provide a easy survey that you can take on your home, and then we give you links to places that you can go to. A lot of the links are from Rewiring America, so you can qualify for the latest discounts, incentives, government programs, whatever might be remaining, to help you get your appliances and cars in shape. Now, what could this do? Well, for a typical household, and this is actually is a small household, the blue bars represent the amount of metric tons of greenhouse gases that each of these appliances could be emitting annually. And so you see that if you get solar power panels, you can save over 4 metric tons of emissions. Going from a gas furnace to a heat pump to heat your home, you can save 3.5. So, and then driving an electric vehicle, depending on where you live, and I think in Oregon, the figures would be much lower because so much of your electrical grid is powered by renewables. But in Chicago, you could lower it by 3 metric tons. In Oregon, it's probably much greater. But at least in Chicago, we could take a house that was emitting 20 metric tons of um, carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases and get that down to uh, 11, 11.5 metric tons. So I'm gonna blow through this. We do an analysis of cars and what are the greenhouse gases for every car. And a lot of people like to say their plug-in hybrid is an effective uh, solution for climate. And it's still dangerous in my opinion, because a plug-in hybrid still is going to burn gasoline, and those metric tons of emissions will never go away. In contrast, if you get a battery electric vehicle, a full electric vehicle, all that's coming, all the power is being used by electricity. And the important thing to remember about being powered from the electrical grid is the grid is constantly improving. And certainly in Oregon, it's a very good grid with over 60% of the grid being renewables. So over time, whatever electric vehicle you have will get better and better and more efficient in terms of emissions. I'll skip over this really quickly, but it's design. This slide was designed to show that our um, even without the federal incentive, uh, the the total cost of ownership of an electric vehicle is now pretty much equal to or less than a fossil fuel car. So, and this is only going to improve as uh, manufacturers roll out lower cost models in the future. So the argument that um, cars only rich people can afford electric vehicles is not at all true. And if you look at the key is the fuel savings are far lower. And this is a very conservative estimate of savings because it's based on a mix of public charging at fast charging and home charging. And for a person like me, 90 to 95% of my charging is done in my home, and I have even far lower costs. So you're talking over 5 to 8 to 10 years, owning an electric vehicle is a far lower cost option than a fossil fuel is car right now. So, I think this is an example of using those um, exhibits I showed you before, and then some more statements about what's going on with EVs. This is an example of pre-bunking. For example, everybody right now is talking about all the fires of EVs, and it's nice to talk about fires when you're talking about Elon Musk and Teslas. But in reality, gasoline cars have much more fires per you know per rates than electric vehicles. So this is part of the myths that are being created out there that need to be um, debunked, so to speak, or pre-bunked. Get this information out before the disinfo posts come around. So, and the bottom line to me is I always end all my presentations with this, is that I've attended a lot of presentations on from corporations trying to defend, we're not ready for getting rid of all fossil fuels and whatever. And I like to always keep this thought in my head, and that is we always need to think about a solution that doesn't involve burning fossil fuels. And it's possible now. It's just that we have corporations and people who don't want us to change. So that is it, and I'm ready to take questions.
Thank you so much. This was an amazing presentation. I just wanted to say that. And if you have questions, raise your hand or just speak up.
Oh, I think is it Nathan had his hand up or not?
Sorry, I was clapping.
Oh, okay.
Me too.
Oh,
There
it's
is
just
a question from Brian Etling.
Bruce, I just wanted to hear about we're always looking for good news also. And I used to live in St. Louis, up until about 2017. And I know you got a really good governor right now, Governor Pritzker, and and I believe a Democratic legislator also. Can you maybe talk a little bit about some of the good things happening in Illinois? As far as with clean energy and that.
Yeah, I think Illinois has passed what's called the Clean Air and Jobs Act and has implemented a lot of initiatives to get battery manufacturers to locate here. And Pritzker has been very active in trying to get the car industry to expand electric vehicle production. We had an old Dodge plant that is now going to be making electric vehicles for Stellantis in Rockford, Illinois. So there's a lot of good things happening. I will say that people in our chapter are kind of upset with Pritzker in the sense that we're considered a blue state, and certainly we're politically very pro limiting of fossil fuels, but we're one of the only blue states that have not adopted the advanced clean truck rules and the advanced clean car rules along with California. And if we would sign up to that, I think it would bring it up to about 20 states. But more importantly, we would cause it to be over 50% of all the vehicles bought in the United States. And that's a very important number because for the car manufacturers, for that, they don't want to build different versions of different cars. So, I think it's really important that the state pass that bill, and we're pressuring them to join California and the other states. I know Oregon has passed that.
Yes, it's always contentious. There are people in the legislature right now who would like to delay it. So that we have actually submitted comment on keeping it active.
Stephen, I think you're on
Thank
mute.
you. I'm sorry, I joined late, and so you may have, I didn't catch quite all what you said about this, but one of the things that I've personally been looking at lately, and I'll say this as someone who's done a lot of electrification, but electric prices have been going up at a much higher rate than gas prices lately. And so when we look at the conversions, especially in some place that's not a largely renewable grid, the complexities that are involved in understanding the coefficients of performance in heat pumps gets particularly challenging. I wonder if you have thoughts about how to simplify those calculations, or at least simplify the presentation of those. Because, like, I look at my own situation, and I say, okay, the gas here costs per actual energy unit maybe a fifth of what electricity costs. Although, of course, that's before you consider the coefficient of performance of a high performance heat pump, but then how much of performance do you get over time with the heat pump, in what climate, and all that sort of thing. It's not straightforward to compute that. So yeah, you're
Yeah, I
fine.
mean, well, I think heat pumps, we've done calculations here, and I mean here it's in Illinois we use natural gas, and heat pumps using electricity, which heat pumps use entirely,
Right.
it's about a 20% less of a utility cost. So that's significant, even where electricity prices are now. So, and then it's very efficient in the summer as well. It's also lower cost than, because many people know that heat pumps are also used by reversing them to air condition a home as well. And those costs are often also lower. But I think the best example to me is when we go traveling. I mean, Americans seem to think that this technology is exotic, but when we go traveling all throughout Europe, everybody uses heat pumps for their homes. Heat pumps in the winter and in the summer to heat and cool, and it's not considered at all controversial. And they have a higher electric rates than we do. So
Yeah, I know it's highly controversial in the UK, and I don't really know why. But and let me say that I've done energy efficiency contracting. I'm not coming at this from a negative perspective. I'm coming at it from the perspective of being able to rationally pre-butt objections to considering a heat pump, because when I did the calculations, I would have to have a very high heating season coefficient of performance to be able to come close to the cost of natural gas here. And I don't know, because the way that the coefficients are presented, it's not. I don't know of any tools or anything else that would let you say, okay, this many therms, this many, what
right,
project your cost savings like you would with a solar installation, for example.
right.
No, I don't know if you have any
Yeah, I
thoughts
mean,
on that.
I'll look for that, but I
Thanks.
know that part of the difference is with the heat pump, as you know, if it's constantly on, you don't have the you have like the cave effect, where the house temperatures are more stable, and so there's less of a need to increase energy in a short amount of time to create the heating. So that's probably the reason why those calculations might be misleading. So especially if you have a geothermal system, which I know is very expensive.
Yeah, I've never seen it pencil out around here, but
Right.
I've known a couple people have had them, but yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have any more questions?
Yeah, this is Lynn. I was trying to raise my hand, but I should have put it on the, I was doing it physically instead of pressing the right button. I wanted to ask Bruce, what types of groups do you speak to who, if you're trying to reach the public who's either, say, uninformed about climate change, I speak to a number of different groups, and it's trying to reach people who aren't, they're not necessarily negative audiences, but I'm trying to not be preaching to the choir. Let's put it that way. I'm looking for audiences and suggestions in terms of groups, for example, church groups or Rotary clubs. And I wonder if you have gone out to try to reach those types of groups and sort of approach people who may actually are just pretty much uninformed about what's going on.
Yeah, so we go to the same groups that you're thinking about, public libraries, senior centers. We try to some municipalities offer helpful hints to consumers, but one of the things that you have to do is you can't couch it in terms of climate change. You have to couch it in terms of save on your utility bills. And
Yeah.
then, during the meeting, you're going to get a very different presentation than you got here. Some of the things were like that EV slide that I showed about costs. So
Mhm.
you have to concentrate on that and mention as a side benefit, we can also do good things to the climate. But I understand what you're saying. You really have to go at it that from a perspective of you can do this, and you'll save money if you do it.
Yeah, I've used that approach, and I've also to a large extent just been shocked by people's lack of knowledge. And I know I've said this to this group before, but I was giving a presentation at a community college, but to their adult education program that's, just much more informal. And you've probably seen, how NASA has these pictures that, do a time sequence from 1750 to today, and they show the increasing temperatures. And there are several people who just said, why don't I know anything about this? And they were shocked. I mean, they really were unaware of what's happening. And I wanted to reply that you're reading the wrong newspapers and you're not in the wrong TV stations. But of course I didn't say that. But it's just people who are completely unaware. And how do we reach those people?
Yeah.
And I won't say they're negative, and I think they're receptive if they had a better understanding. And it's how do we get to those people?
Yeah. And not to be depressing, but our government's making it even harder because the myths are going to spread even more. So that if we had a problem before with people not really believing that EVs or heat pumps are a viable solution, they'll be getting even more disinfo in the future. So it makes our job even harder.
Yep. And absolutely terrific. Oh, one question. Can we use some of your slides?
Oh, sure. I'll send you. No shame.
I totally appreciate the effort and that your team has put into producing this, because it's a huge amount of work to pull that information together and get the slides just right. And so
Right.
fabulous.
And we were also we were involved with some other chapters. We knew that some of the pages, we got some of the information from the federal government, and we knew some of those pages were going to disappear. So
Yeah.
we went and downloaded as much information as we can. We actually worked with the DC Climate Reality Project group and chapter, and they were very helpful in preserving some of the information.
Oh, great. I may have to contact you at some point, because it's really disappointing when you go, although I've discovered some things are now on like YouTube or, elsewhere that they've redirected to non-government site, but it's come down very fast.
By the way, I mean, you probably remember the slide I had on the European Union. The European Union has some excellent slides. So, I would encourage you to look at that website from Brussels.
Russell, okay.
Thank you so much, Bruce, and we certainly hope that Tom is feeling better. Are there any final questions? Maybe one more question, and then we should let Bruce get back.
All right.
So,
Well, thanks.
yeah.
Thanks, everybody. I'll leave now. All right. Bye-bye.